Hello everyone, it's the top of the hour. I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today for another great presentation about CIP 14 from Allan Wick. This is Victor Garlington with RiskWatch. For those of you that don't know, RiskWatch is sponsoring this and wanted to let you know we are a leading provider of compliance assessment software since 1993. Actually, our flagship product, SecureWatch, is a cloud-based platform that assists private companies and government agencies in automating their inspections, their audits, their governance, and risk and compliance assessments. If you'd like to have a free tour of our software platform, please just go to our website, riskwatch.com, and request a demo. Today, I'd like to reintroduce to you, if you have not been to one of our previous presentations, Mr. Allan Wick. Allan has over 30 years of experience in security. He holds the position of Enterprise Security Manager for Tri-State Generation and Transmission Association, Inc., which is one of the largest electric co-ops in the U.S. Allan has been a volunteer with many organizations. He currently serves as ACES International Council Vice President and a voting member of NERC CIP. He holds a number of certifications which include Certified Fraud Examiner, Certified Protection Professional, Physical Security Professional, Professional Certified Investigator, Certified Business Continuity Professional, and PADI Dive Master. Just in his spare time, he has nothing else to do. So please help me welcome Allan Wick. Allan, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Vic.
Thank you.
I want to thank each of you that have joined the call today. This is the fourth in a series of webinars conducted on one of the hot topics in the electric utility industry, CIP 14, the Physical Security Standard. This is gets even hotter as we approach the implementation deadline of October 1, 2015. So, as we approach that, there will be more and more information available. I know that I've received many different invitations from a number of different organizations on CIP 14 on how to implement it and what it means. And this last week, I was able to attend the WEC Physical Security Working Group biannual meeting in Tacoma, Washington, and this was a hot topic there. As well as next week, the NERC CIP will be meeting Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in Jacksonville, Florida. So, of course, we will be discussing it at that time, and our Physical Security Standard Working Group will hold its first face-to-face meeting during the NERC CIP on Wednesday the 11th. One of the things I wanted to bring up to you, it's not necessarily related, but the ESISAC, in case you don't know, conducts a monthly conference call on the first Tuesday of the month, and so that's today at 1 p.m. Mountain or 3 p.m. Eastern. And so I encourage each of you to attend that if you don't. If you don't participate, I would just ping the ESISAC Brian Harrell, who's the director of that, to get on the invitation list so that you receive all the different updates that the ESISAC sends out. And that's especially important for today's topic, the NERC CIP 14 Threat and Vulnerability Assessments. So enough about me and enough about industry information. Let's get started. If this will unlock here. Okay, so today's learning objectives will be going over the standard requirement, some information from the drafting team's perspective, and then our threat and vulnerability assessments, and third-party reviews, and of course a summary. If you'll please send your questions to Vic via the online the chat avenue. That'll be good. So Here we go. So the standard requirement reading from it is that each transmission owner that identified a station, substation, or a primary control center in requirement 1 shall conduct an evaluation of the potential threats and vulnerabilities of a physical attack to each. There's been a lot of discussion out in the sectors about, what types of physical attack are we talking about? Well, does that include vandalism, etc.? So I want to read the definition of attack is to take aggressive action against a place or enemy forces with weapons or armed force, typically in a battle or war, etc. So that's the verb. A noun is an aggressive and violent action against a person or a place. So this is the requirement. It is a physical attack. So when you're doing your threat and vulnerability assessment, you need to keep that in mind. And the evaluation shall consider the following: unique characteristics, prior history of attack on similar facilities, and intelligence or threat warnings. So the drafting team perspective, the requirement meets the FERC directive from paragraph 8 in the order on physical security that the reliability standard must require tailored evaluation. That's tailored evaluation of potential threats and vulnerabilities to facilities identified in requirement R1 and verified, of course, with requirement 2, which is the third-party verification. Threats and vulnerabilities may vary from facility to facility based on factors such as the facility's location. So, of course, location meaning, is it on the West Coast or the East Coast? Is it in Iowa? Is it urban, suburban, rural? The size, is it a small vault type of facility, or is it 3 football fields? Its function, of course, existing protections and attractiveness of the target. As such, the requirement does not mandate a one-size-fits-all approach, but requires entities to account for the unique characteristics of their facilities. Requirement 4 does not explicitly state when the evaluation of threats and vulnerabilities must occur or be completed. However, requirement 5, which is the physical security plan, requires that their plan must be completed with 120 days following completion of R2. So you need to have the threat and vulnerability assessment and the physical security plan completed within 120 days of requirement 2, which is the third-party review of R1. So an entity has the flexibility when to complete the requirement R4 evaluation, provided that it is completed in time to comply. So from the drafting team's perspective, we looked at the FERC order, and we didn't want to have scope creep, so we kept to the verbiage that was in the FERC directive, so that it's a tailored evaluation. You have to look at the threat and vulnerabilities from facility to facility, and it's not prescriptive on exactly what must be done. So we'll get into this a little bit deeper when we get into threats, but let's say, for instance, location. Location is if there's a threat that's occurred or an attack that's occurred in, say, in Saudi Arabia. Does that impact here? Well, not necessarily. It could be if there's if there's been a warning by some group, let's say, for instance, in the United States, of the same one that was there, then that could impact. But if there's an attack on a substation in another part of the world and you're in Iowa, that may not necessarily be germane. So, of course, size matters, and its function. The function really also is determined back in R1 when you're doing the risk assessment that's required in R1. So, diving into the threat assessment. So there's actually two pieces to this, and so we're looking at the prior history of attack and frequency, geography, severity, and then the intelligence threat warnings on the other side. So diving down into this, our threat assessment should consider the adversary, intent, and capability. So is the adversary, is it a environmental group? Is it a terrorist? Is it a disgruntled employee? So then the intent comes from those groups. Is it to pay back the company for something that they did to this individual? Is an environmental group looking to make a statement? Or is it someone who wants to bring down the bulk electric system? And then also we need to tie that back and look at what we believe is the capabilities of the person or organizations that are a threat to the facility. So from this, we need to develop an adversary capabilities list and then a design basis threat. These will determine the mitigation strategies that will be deployed. There's a few industry tools that are available. I'll read off a couple. One is the FEMA Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment that could be helpful. Another is the DOD tool VISA, which is the Vertical Integrated of Security Analysis, which arrives at threats through tabletop exercises. And I know that VISA has been recommended by some of the national labs and some of the presentations that I've received. So your threat assessment should drive your resulting vulnerability assessment. Understanding the threat is the first step in the assessment process. So where does your threat come from? Is it land, sea, or air? Is it, of course, one of the hot topics at the Physical Security Working Group last week was drones. I'm sure that's on everybody's radar. And what do you do about drones? And how is the threat carried out? Of course, it's the weaponry and the capabilities. And then, of course, what assets need to be protected and from what? So, of course, working with your transmission folks to determine the critical components. Now, one of my peers at the Physical Security Working Group last week had an excellent peer group. They put everybody together on the team to walk the site. They had not only security, but they had telecom, they had substation design, they had system planning, and I can't even remember, but there's 5 more. So it seemed like their team had everybody that had a stake that could provide information to determine the critical components of the facility, the substation. So when we're gathering information on our adversary groups, we should be looking at their general characteristics, adversary size and definitions, their objectives, their tactical competency, operational techniques, knowledge level, equipment, and weaponry, so that you end up with at least some kind of adversary that you're going to try to protect against. I heard a call a week or 2 ago, and somebody said they're looking at 2 people with a flatbed truck and something short of a .50 caliber. So, and that's reasonable, but you need to come up with something to protect against. So some examples of a low threat example would be a vandal. They wouldn't have any sensor knowledge, no target knowledge, 1 person. The most they would have an assault rifle, and their objective would be malicious damage or material theft, which could actually bring down the station. So these could be your copper thieves that are in the area, your tweakers that are looking to steal something that they can sell. So it's a low level. Your medium level threat, which is going to be what most of us are looking at, would be violent radicals, saboteurs, extremists. So theirs would be a overt or covert standoff attack, or a site penetration, some sensor, target, and communications knowledge, assault rifles, and possibly even limited night vision capabilities. They could have limited knowledge of local law enforcement response tactics, and that they've perhaps watched them respond to other facilities. And anywhere from 1 to 4 attackers. And typically they'll be willing to endanger personnel but not be prepared to kill someone. So these are the type that would be trying to take out a substation, in the middle of the night when no one's there. And some of their weaponry could be flammable liquids like a Molotov cocktail, or even some type of homemade charge, maybe 10 pounds or less. They would have some basic surveillance skills so that they could watch this facility beforehand. And they may even use diversion techniques in pulling law enforcement over to someplace else so they couldn't respond in time. Typically, it would be an attack on a single facility, and the motivation would be to shut down the facility or cause catastrophic damage. So your high threat are your terrorists, and you can use your imagination and to run that scenario all the way out to vehicle-borne IED, man-portable devices, explosives up to 50 pounds, detailed sensor knowledge and target knowledge as well, moderately skilled assault teams that are coordinated, and could be even use communication jamming. Of course, using law enforcement diversion tactics with 2 to 5 attackers, and prepared to kill. And their motivation would be to bring down the system or a regional grid shutdown. And so that's your highest threat. So understanding the threat will help you to effectively design your performance tests. So your current threat information must come from outside the entity. So we talked about some of the threats before, but we at our companies, unless we participate in the Fusion Center or on a joint terrorism task force, where we've recently just come out of VHS, we're not going to necessarily have the current threat information, and the requirement in CIP 14 requires us to look to outside agencies for current threat information. I'll quote from the standard guideline and technical basis section, quote, "In order to effectively conduct a threat and vulnerability assessment, the asset owner may be the best source to determine specific site vulnerabilities, but current and evolving threats may best be determined by others in the intelligence or law enforcement communities. A number of resources have been identified in the standard, but many others exist, and asset owners are not limited to where they may turn for assistance. Additional resources may include state or local fusion centers, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Federal Bureau of Investigations, Public Safety Canada, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and InfraGard chapters, which are coordinated by the FBI. And so in the standard, and up on my screen, it shows you what the standard shows as some entities to look to for intelligence. So of course your ERO in the standard means NERC and or your regional entities. So ERO equals NERC equals regional entities. And then of course your ES-ISEC can be your most important source of current information for the electric utility sector. And then it says U.S. federal or Canadian governments. So we've given you a brief overview of the threats, and as I failed to mention in the first slide, these are this presentation is based on what I know and my opinions, and I don't represent NERC, and I don't speak on behalf of NERC, even though I was one of 11 on the drafting team, so bear that in mind. So, vulnerability assessment. If an entity has one or more experienced electric industry security professionals on their staff, they would be qualified to conduct the vulnerability assessment. And of course, you can pay someone to do that for you as well as conducting your threat assessment. Your system topology should be considered, such as, which voltages are you trying to protect? Location, urban, suburban, or rural. So of course your vulnerabilities in a rural setting are going to be different than a substation right in the middle of a neighborhood. Rural sections, of course, have longer law enforcement response times. There could be, it could have been built down in a bowl so that there's high ground all around it, which makes it more difficult to protect from rifle fire. Your urban areas, the paths are hard to get in and out of. Also, we need to look at size. Is it less than an acre or more? This will help you to decide whether to protect the entire facility or just the critical components. Because if you have a 5-10 acre property line with a chain link fence around that, and your critical components really take up, less than a half an acre, then we may want to consider protecting the components and not the entire outside perimeter. So I also need to look at the function of the facility. How many lines are coming in? How critical is it to the bulk electric system? And then what are the existing protections that are already there? Now, to begin with, the assets that were looked at in R1 were going to be part of the CIP version 5 bright line criteria. So, more than likely, these facilities are already going to be falling under the cybersecurity standards. So you probably have some type of protection already in place, especially you'll have card readers on the doors of the control house and things like, and possibly even some cameras. But card readers don't prevent or mitigate a physical attack. So we're going to have to layer on top of what's already there with the existing protections. And then also we need to look at the attractiveness of the target, which could help by where it's located, so that it may be easier for a adversary to go against a rural target than an urban target. So we need to look at the vulnerable points. That's of course the fence line, your critical components that are inside, the control house. So how do we go about protecting those? So some of the targets of consequence would include the control center, and I don't need to explain that because that's the hub of where everything operates. You could take out one transformer, but if there's many others that are still operating, the control house can still operate, and the substations can still operate. Of course, the transformers are targets of consequence, the bushings, circuit breakers, your microwave relay information, your fiber optic lines, and of course the SCADA itself. And that's where it's important to bring in all of these players on your assessment team so that all are able to contribute to your vulnerability assessment to determine what needs to be protected and possibly how to protect them. So what are your vulnerabilities? How can your adversary get to you? Is there a gravel road? Is it a paved road? Is it how can they arrive at the facility? Is it via truck? Do they have to walk because you have protection? How can they get in? What's their attack vector method on, like I said, either by foot or mobile, or are they delivering a package via a drone? And how effective are your existing countermeasures and your response force? Most responses that I've seen and heard in that if it's a rural area, it's anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes. If it's an urban area, it could be as short as 10 minutes, but of course that depends on what your law enforcement response are doing. Do you have a security service provider already there? Is that person armed? I've heard in the industry we have both ways, and that right now some of the critical facilities, they have an unarmed security officer, and that person's job is to report immediately anything that goes awry. But do we want to arm them? Do you have effective policies and procedures in place? And a lot of these are developed for the safety of your own employees, but also they needed to be designed to protect against an insider threat. So do your employees follow the policies and procedures, and how do you minimize your vulnerability to mitigate your risk? And then countermeasures deployed and those that are contemplated. Some of the assessment tools that I've heard of are Building Design for Homeland Security Unit 4 Vulnerability Assessment, which is produced by DHS and FEMA. And then FEMA also has the Risk Management Fundamentals. FEMA also has Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment Guide. There's FEMA 452 Risk Assessment, How to Guide to Mitigate Potential Terrorist Attacks Against Buildings. And ASIS International has a Risk Assessment Guidelines, and I just saw this week that their new Risk Assessment Standard has gone out for approval to the technical team. So that should probably be out within the next 30 to 45 days. So look for that if you're a member of ASIS. I think that's a member-only product. And then, of course, there's Carver, RAM-E, U.S. Army Composite Risk Management, DoD Operations Security Program Manual. And Carver is a computer tool designed for Homeland Security to help identify assets from a large group of assets. So I know that Tucson Electric were trained in the Carver method a month or two ago. And so there's organizations that will teach that to your organization if you want to avail yourself of it. I know that that's recommended by one of the national labs that I heard a presentation on. So a comprehensive assessment builds a foundation for an effective layered security plan. And I heard a recommendation from Battelle Corporation to consider, and this will be my last point, is that they're recommending to incorporate an all hazards threat assessments into the vulnerability assessments, as physical attacks are only one of many threats to the bulk electric system. Now, this is not required by the standard, but I also have heard that there's a couple electric utility organizations that are looking at, or possibly looking at a all hazards approach to, for, say, for instance, geomagnetic thermal device disturbances. So the standard does not require that. The standard requires us to look at this from a physical attack. So that's a decision that your company would need to look at what they want to do. And I've heard that that roughly we're looking at approximately $5 million per substation at one company to upgrade that to a RiskWatch 14 compliant. So third-party reviews. Just want to throw this here at the end because it is part of CIP 14. but it's not part of R4. But you know, you can read from the slides. You'll have an unaffiliated third party to review R4 and R5. And these are some of the requirements. I recently participated in the development of the NERC third-party approval criteria that will be communicated to the industry in the near future. They're hoping that this will be out no later than April. It will include physical security and electric industry experience. And so that's the two key components that you have is physical security experience and electric industry experience. And that's what most of our third-party review that we built into the standard. So you see that a PSP or a CPP with electric industry experience, and then of course an entity or organization approved by the ERO, and so that, like I said, that list will be coming out pretty soon. And again, ERO equals NERC equals regional entities as well. And then a governmental agency with physical security expertise and an entity or organization with demonstrated law enforcement, government, or military physical security expertise. So to quote from the R6 rationale in the standard, as with the verification required by Requirement 2, Requirement 6 provides transmission owners and transmission operators the flexibility to work with third-party reviewer throughout the Requirement 4 evaluation and the development of the Requirement 5 security plan. This would allow entities to satisfy their obligations under R6 concurrent with the satisfaction of their obligations under R4 and 5. So this standard provides many opportunities for the third-party review without spending tons of money. And I've recently heard that some organizations have been reaching out to their DHSPSAs, and a couple of them I think have said that they wouldn't mind doing this. But then I've also heard that their reporting headquarters in Washington has said that they won't do this because for evidence, you're going to have a signed document that says that Requirement 4 and Requirement 5 were conducted on such and such date, and that they conform to the standard. So so what I've been told is DHS doesn't want to provide this kind of a document and or that kind of liability for the United States government. But we'll see how that pans out by the end of the year, and also some of the EROs, some of the regional entities have stated that they may want to do this, but I don't think that's necessarily been firmed up yet. And so at this point I want to mention the RSAWs because I was talking about that. Some folks have been getting hung up on the RSAWs for this requirement. And so I want to go through that just briefly. So the RSAW for R4, which is the threat and vulnerability assessment piece, and I'm going to read from the RSAW itself. It says, evidence requested. Provide the following evidence or other evidence to demonstrate compliance. A description of the entity's process for executing the evaluation prescribed in Requirement 4, and dated evidence of the evaluation prescribed in Requirement 4. Then, under the section to be completed by the Compliance Enforcement Authority, it says review evidence of evaluation and verify it considers the following, and these are right from the requirement. Potential threats and vulnerabilities as described in Requirement 4, unique characteristics as described in Requirement R4.1, prior history of attack on similar facilities, taking into account the frequency, geographic proximity, and severity of past physical security-related events. You see, word for word, right out of the standard. And lastly, intelligence or warnings, as described in Part 4.3. So, and it says, note to auditor, see above note concerning third-party verifications for important details regarding audit risk assessment and related rigor of audit procedures to be applied. So the auditor should cross-reference the transmission stations, substations, and primary control centers identified in the risk assessment, which is performed under R1, to the evaluation prescribed in R4 to ensure it's complete. In other words, you have to do an assessment for each facility, so you can't leave any out. Again, it's really brief on what the auditors are going to be looking for, that an entity has complied with R4. Potential threats and vulnerabilities, unique characteristics, prior history, taking into account uniqueness, and intelligent warnings. 1, 2, 3, 4 things. That's it. So try not to get hung up on the degree to which they're going to be reviewing those. And so when we were on the drafting team, when we were working with the audit staff that were doing this, you know, it was clear on the intent of the standard and what the auditors should be looking for. I guess these screens like to lock up whenever you're not using them. So in summary, the requirement 4 meets the expectations in the FERC order. The threat assessment should be conducted using a tailored evaluation with the government or law enforcement input. The vulnerability assessment should be conducted using the unique characteristics of the facility, and the third-party review of the assessments and the plan. And of course, the R4 plan must address the results in R4. So if you remember from my presentation a few months back on the physical security plan requirement 5, it says that the plan must address the threats and vulnerabilities identified in R4. So there needs to be a clear linkage between the two. So now it's time for questions. So Vic, I will turn this over to you, and you'll field the questions, and I'll answer them.
Okay. Everyone, feel free to go ahead and enter your questions in the questions or chat area within the panel to your right. We'll take any and all questions at this time. Okay, Alan, the first question we have is, what's the time requirement between inspections?
Define inspections.
Well, they meant to, I guess they're saying within the security inspection of the facility. Is there a requirement that states that they have to do it ever so often, once a year?
Oh, okay. So people are thinking about probably the cybersecurity standards that says that there will be maintenance and testing for security devices on a within a 2-year cycle. So this standard does not address that. It's generally accepted security practices that security devices will be maintained and tested according to the manufacturer's recommendations. So some have yearly, some don't have any, but I think that the either annual or every 2 years is justifiable to do that. And I want to point out as well that instead of the functional testing, which you do when you bring up a system and make sure it operates, there needs to be a performance test conducted as well, so that, you know, does all of the systems that are integrated, are they integrated so that you can mitigate the risk that you've identified. So it's not just does a card reader work or does an intrusion system work and detect, but will it delay the person to the length of time so that law enforcement can react. Hopefully that answered the question.
Okay. The next question we have, Allan, is by what time frame does the R4 and the R5 need to be completed by?
So I don't have that in front of me, but I'm almost positive that it's within 120 days after the completion of R2. So R1, which is identifying those critical facilities that are going to be under SIP 14, that has to be actually completed by October 1, 2015. So the version 2 of SIP 14 has gone out for comment, but they haven't changed the timeline or implementation date. So again, October 1, 2015, the facilities have to be identified. And then within 90 days of that, R2 requires within 90 days of that review has to be conducted. So that system analysis has to be reviewed by a third party. And so at the end of that 90-day period, then the 120-day clock runs for R4 and R5. So effectively, it's 90 plus 120.
Okay, makes sense. Well, let's see if we have any more questions from our audience. Feel free to go ahead and enter them right now to the screen to your right, your control panel. And it has the chat box or the questions that you can enter. Okay, we have one more. Allan, the person wants to know, with that, does that include R6 review in the timeline completion as a follow-up?
No, that 120 days does not include that. And I'm trying to think right now how I can lay my hands on something real quick, but I don't remember. I want to say that one is 60 days because it's not as involved as the R1, R2 analysis. But I think that's 60 days later. But no, the review is not part of the 120 days. But it's in it's in the standard, and it's on the NERC website.
Okay. Well, great. Well, with that, everyone, we're just going to get ready to wrap this up. I wanted to also say thank you to Allan for going ahead and being a great presenter as always today. If you want more information about Allan, the best way to reach him is LinkedIn, as you see his profile here, Allan Wick. And if you want more information about RiskWatch, you can see this is our information on LinkedIn. And feel free to go to our website here, which is riskwatch.com. If you look to the right here, you can request a demo in one of the green boxes. It will take you to a test drive of our online platform to go ahead and do your risk assessments. And with that, I'd like to say thanks everyone for your time. This will be available. You will be given a link so you can go ahead and access this presentation as well. Allan,
Vic,
thank you again for your time.
For everyone there, it's actually 90 days is R6. I just was able to look at it. So it's 90 days.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
More great information. Thank you, Allan. Thank you, everyone. Good day.